Hello Patreon people, this is the Patreon intro for my second video about antinatalism. I just want to get a couple clerical things out of the way. First and foremost, I want to say thank you. The Patreon has almost doubled in the past week since I made that first video. It's been crazy, the response has been insane, and I hope that people will continue to give me their ideas. I'm extremely grateful for both the money and the opportunity to talk about stuff and sort of more directly communicate with my viewers and make the videos that you want me to make and that I want to make, and those things come together and merge, and it's pretty enjoyable. So anyway, don't be alarmed, but I am going to post a truncated, edited version of this video on both my YouTube channels. A couple people asked me for a sample video to see what kind of content I was making. I don't know if they forgot or if they wanted to see if I'd kept up my game and whatnot. But anyway, I'm going to be posting an edited version of this video on YouTube. This is not going to be a regular thing. Your content is going to stay exclusive. Don't worry about that. It's just one-time thing, or maybe like once every couple months thing to generate, hopefully, a couple more Patreon subscribers. It will not be giving your content away for free. Also, I'm going to be doing some Twitch streams. Twitch streams are free. You don't have to do anything for them. You just have to go over there when I'm on. I'm probably going to be playing Guild Wars 2. For those of you who don't know, I play, I co-lead a Guild Wars 2 guild. I'm going to be doing that. I'm probably going to stream most of our little runs from that, like 4 or 5 days a week if I can, depending on how the game's performance lets me do that. But yeah, there are going to be some Twitch streams coming up soon. There's a link in the description, of course, if you want to follow me there. If not, that's fine. Anyway, we're about to get into my second video, my second comeback video about antinatalism. So, without further ado, here is the video. Greetings everybody, I'm obviously Jesus, and I'm here today to respond to a question from Sweet Jesus, who asked if I can talk about antinatalism. And that's precisely what I am going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about the technical definition of what it means and what the logic behind it is, because there is a technical side to this issue, utilitarianism, or negative utilitarianism as it's called. It seeks to minimize pain rather than maximize happiness, which is the typical utilitarian goal. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to me personally and my personal feelings about the subject. And so, without further ado, let's do that. For those of you who have never heard of antinatalism before, it is simply the idea that people should not create more people. It's the idea that childbirth is negative, that it is not necessarily morally bad, but is in some way, shape, or form detrimental to somebody. And generally the somebody in that situation is the hypothetical child that is being considered to be brought into the world. Now, antinatalism is something that I've thought about in my own personal life a lot. It's something that I've oscillated on, especially in these past few years that I've been gone from YouTube. I've had a lot of changes of heart about it. I've thought about it a lot, and I've thought, at times that maybe I would want to have children, and then other times I definitely wouldn't want to have children. And so it's a complex issue for me personally, and we'll talk about that like I said in a second. But antinatalism, first and foremost, works on a logic system. A logic system that says, A, you can have a child, or B, you cannot have a child. And then A, you can have a child who is happy or would be happy, and then B, you can have a child who would not be happy or is not happy. So basically there's a 4-box matrix, and this is one of the times where I wish I had my whiteboard, but that whiteboard is actually holding some very important stuff on it. I might buy a tiny little one and draw on it pretty soon using the Patreon money, so maybe that'll be making an appearance in future videos, but just for now, imagine 4 boxes. Now this 4-option matrix type deal was posited first by a man named Hermann Vetter, I have it written down over here, in 1933. But it was perfected, or not necessarily perfected, but it was worked on by a man named David Benatar, and he came up with these 4 outcomes, and they're a little bit complex, so I might read from my notes just for this part. Anyway, there's 2 possible ways that having a child can go. You can have one, or you can not have a child. You can't have half a child. It's a binary thing. So option A, you have the child experiences mostly a painful life, and that is bad. Option B, when you have the child experiences mostly pleasure, which is good. And then there's the 2 options for not having a child. The child never exists, there is no pain, that's a good outcome. And then option B, the child exists, they experience no pleasure, but it's not bad, it's simply neutral because the child never existed anyway to either experience or not experience pleasure. So the idea is basically that when you have a child, you are throwing the dice, you are risking the outcome for a bad life. The only scenario in this matrix in which a bad life can actually happen, a person can be alive and experience pain, is if you have the child. If you never have the child, you never have to risk your child experiencing pain. So I know there's a lot of normal people out there, or quote-unquote normal people out there, who might have a hard time sympathizing with this because they don't struggle with mental illness on a day-to-day basis. But people who struggle with these things understand better than basically anybody how the idea of minimizing pain becomes more important, than maximizing your pleasure. You can't even get to maximizing your pleasure because you're so busy trying to fight off pain from so many different angles. And somebody who has a lot of pain from external sources, not necessarily mental illness sources, can sympathize with this too, I bet, because they realize that the more bad shit you have in your life, be it internal or external, that you have coming at you, the more you shift your focus from actively pursuing happiness to simply defending yourself, putting up walls and guarding yourself against pain. And there's a lot of philosophers who think that, and I agree with them, that the idea that we need to belong in the world, the religions people fashion themselves, the ways people try to make themselves, more permanent, more real, more, long-lasting, the whole idea of propagating your seed or leaving a legacy, that idea is simply our own defense against the fear of death, and not necessarily even the fear of death, because there's some people out there, even atheists, who are completely comfortable with the idea, on the surface at least, that they're going to die and that they have a finite existence and one day they simply will not exist and will have absolutely no connection to the world we know now. But I think even if you're not afraid of it, there is an incomprehensibility to the concept of death that is so, simply out of our reach mentally, that cannot even be touched because we wouldn't even know where to begin. I think there's a concept like that, and it makes people do irrational things. And having children and bringing another life into the world is probably the highest order of those irrational things, because it's simply our vain desire to last beyond our physical limitations. And that's something that worries me, and that's something that I think, I didn't steal this from True Detective. I was thinking this way long before True Detective Season 1, but if you remember that TV show, Matthew McConaughey's character says that we should all just join hands and walk into the sunset and not have any more children. One last hurrah for humanity, and then, just flicker out like a light bulb. And I think that, it takes a lot of arrogance, to quote another part of his character's dialogue. I think it does take a lot of arrogance to pull a child into this world, because I don't think that 80 years, the average human life expectancy, at least here in America where it's like 70, 80 years, is enough. And we're sort of transitioning now into my personal feelings about it, because when I think of my children, when I think of, for those of you who don't know, I take care of my friend's dog. I love that dog to death. I wish I could give that dog my life force. I wish I could just simply give her my essence and put the essence of my life and however much time I have left into that dog so she could live out the rest of her life. And, she's not even my dog, technically speaking. I spend a lot of time with her, but she's not my dog. One day I'll be out of her life and I will move away or something, and I won't experience her anymore. And so, if I can love that dog that much, I can't even imagine the idea of bringing another human life into this world only to give it 70 or 80 years. Do you know how little that is in terms of the entire history of humanity? Yes, we'll have the benefit of all the past stuff that's gone on because of the internet and how things can be archived and stored in tiny kind of little bits of data. So I'm not so much worried about the past as I am the future. If I have children in 10 years, I'll be 34. My children, let's see, it's 2017 now, it'll be 2027 in 10 years. They wouldn't even live potentially to see the next century. And can you imagine how much music they're going to miss? Can you imagine how much culture, how much information, how much technology, how much of everything that I value and that they might value, how many books, how many authors, how many films, how many TV shows, how much great stuff that, you know, assuming we don't get nuked by Donald Trump, fucker, we'll talk about that in another goddamn video, but assuming we don't get all wiped out by nukes, imagine what they're going to miss. 70, 80 years, and then they're nothing. That's my children. That's my flesh and blood that I gave in my own narcissistic way. I can't even imagine how people think that's okay, honestly. To pull people into this world that is often full of so much pain, and to, even if their lives are perfect, only give them 70, 80 years of perfection, honestly, that's not enough. Even if it were 70 to 80 years of perfection, it's still such a tiny little slice to bet on. To bet that, you know, to say that this is worth it. This is worth you dying. That's insane to me. It makes absolutely no sense. And of course, now I've tipped my hand and I've kind of revealed how I personally feel about this issue and where I am at it now, which is kind of the same place I was when I left YouTube, but there was a time. There was a time when I thought differently. I thought that I could, you know, and for those of you who've watched the earlier video, you'll remember that I talked about there being a special someone to me that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I thought that she and I could have had children and given them a good life and brought them into a good world, a good environment, and, you know, their lives would have been worth living. And you know, to some degree, I still think that we might have been able to give them a good life, but I don't know that I could ever forgive myself for bringing a child into the world to say, you know, hey, here you got 80 years, and even if there's modern medicine innovations in your lifetime, you got 100, you got 150 years. Even then, it's still so small. It's still such a small fragment of time to give somebody to live. And that's to say nothing. That's to say nothing of my own personal, you know, problems that I could have brought into the life of a child. And that's what I want to talk about next, which is the idea that people can protect their children, you know, from themselves and even more arrogantly from the rest of the world. I mean, parents obviously have children, if they intend to have children at least, with the intent of giving them a good life free of pain, which is admirable, but I don't think it's necessarily achievable, because not only do people have flaws all over them, all over their psyches, people can't escape those flaws, and even if they could, they can't defend their children from the flaws of other people out in the world. Parents are going to not always be able to watch their children. Their children are going to grow up and go away to school and go away to college and go away to work, and people are going to hurt them. And that's a part of the negative utilitarianism thing, the idea that our duty is to maximize, or excuse me, our duty is to minimize pain rather than maximize pleasure. The idea that parents can protect their children and fulfill that duty to maximize pain even if they had no flaws themselves is absurd. And I mean, I am a person who knows firsthand, better than a lot of people in this world, just how impossible it is for parents to even stop passing their flaws on to their children when they're very young. I grew up in an environment of abuse. Honestly, you know, they actually modified the DSM to include this. You can get PTSD by proxy. I witnessed my parents physically and emotionally and verbally abuse each other day in, day out, from the time I was born, basically, from some of my earliest memories. So the idea that my parents should have had me is absurd, and the idea that I could somehow transcend this barrier, and this is something I want to talk about in another video, the idea that the more bad shit that happens in your life, the higher the probability is for your life to continue to be bad and for you to get more bad onto whatever potential next generation you might sire. But the idea that I could not pass on my flaws somehow to a child is a bit silly because they're part of me. And I think the responsible thing to do is to not have children, because I don't know, as much as I would love them, as much as I know I would emotionally connect with them, I don't know that I could be a good provider, and I don't know that my temper wouldn't flare up. I don't know that I might not be able to stop being the selfish person I am now. I truly believe in my heart of hearts that when you have a child, the parent ceases to be the most important person in their life, and the child has to be. But I don't know that, even though I believe that I could live up to it because of what was passed on to me from my parents, and I'm sure they passed that on to me because of what was passed on to them from their parents. So it all goes back to just one big chain of people hurting each other and passing on their trauma from generation to generation. So I think the responsible thing to do in my life, especially on a personal level, is simply to not have children, to not procreate. And everybody has trauma, maybe not as bad as me, so I think the responsible thing for everybody to do is to not procreate, because I don't think there are people in this world, I don't think there are such hypothetically perfect people who exist in this world that they are free of the obligation to not have children because they are so incapable of not passing on some trauma or pain. We have to make sure that your children don't suffer. And do you know what the ultimate way to do that is? It's to simply not have children. And that's basically, in a nutshell, the philosophy of antinatalism. Because if you want to minimize pain, the best thing you can do is never give it the opportunity to happen in the first place. Basically, humans are scared as shit to die, or they're so baffled by the incomprehensibility of it that they are effectively scared into wanting to pass on their genes and leave a legacy. But, you know, passing on your genes doesn't intrinsically do something for you when you're not alive. When you're not alive, any children, any grandchildren, any millions of generations hence that you have that are descended from you, you can't experience that, you can't know that, you can't interface with that in any way, shape, or form. So people just get scared and baffled and bamboozled into wanting to leave themselves a legacy, wanting to pass on some part of themselves to the next generation. And one of the most socially acceptable ways you can do that in this society right now as it stands is to, of course, have children. But you know what? The best way to do right by your children is to simply not bring them into existence. I mean, I don't want to kill myself. I don't want to die. I don't want to experience dying in any way, shape, or form. But I would certainly, if I could go back and whisper in my mother's ear and tell her to just keep taking her birth control and never have children, I absolutely would. I would absolutely prefer to never have been born. And I think that gives me kind of a unique perspective, because how many people can you go out there in the world and say, you know, do you want to die? Do you wish you had never been born? How many people would give the answer, no, I don't want to die, but yes, I wish I never would have been born? And that's what I kind of want to do with these videos, is to explore the perspective of somebody who is, I mean, I'm not trying to flatter myself here, but I don't think that I'm one of many. I think that I'm pretty unique in terms of my perspective on the world. And excuse me if that's a little bit, you know, masturbatory for me to say, but I mean, that's what I want to do. I want to create a video documentary centered around what it's like to be a person living with various mental illnesses and these perspectives and these traumas. And so that's kind of what I want to do with this video, and that's what I hopefully did today, and in exploring the concept of antinatalism. So I hope this answered your question, sweet Jesus, and we can talk more about this later if it didn't. As always, please leave me your ideas and thoughts and stuff in the comments section of either the Patreon post of this video, or the ideas post on Patreon, or the comments section of this video on the unlisted YouTube page. I have been obviously Jesus. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but we can always address it later on. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was thought-provoking at the very least, and I hope you think it's worth your money. So, I'm obviously Jesus. Thank you, Patreon people, for watching. Thank you, non-Patreon people, for watching if you're watching the sample video. And I will see you next week.